right. I'm Nicolette, and today Brian and I are here to discuss keeping up with demand as the electronics industry is just booming. The current electronics industry demand touches pretty much all sectors. This surge, it goes beyond the effects of COVID and is driven by the reality that our world is becoming more digital across all applications. For electronics manufacturers and distributors, it has been a challenge to stay on top of the growing demand as shortages continue and prices rise. So then how exactly do you keep up with demand as the industry booms? Well, we're here with Mark Patrick. He is the technical marketing manager covering EMEA for Mauser Electronics, and he's here to discuss some of the growth sectors and motivation behind them, some of the growing technologies, and to gain some insight into what Mauser has been doing to keep its finger on the pulse at all times. So thank you, Mark, for joining us. We appreciate your time today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
So why don't we kick off maybe with an overview, your outlook on the demand in the electronics industry. What's driving the growth? What can we expect in the next year or two?
Okay. Yeah. So I think we're all very aware that demand doesn't seem to be slowing down, and therefore we all still face the challenges of maybe not being able to get enough components, enough of what we want. Mauser does a pretty good job of working closely with our suppliers to keep our inventory levels high. But, if you think about what's happened in the last couple of years, then the need for growth in infrastructure, the developments around 5G, the continued rollout of what we might all recognize and call IoT, so all kinds of connected devices, the implementation of AI and machine learning in those, and even things like, electric vehicles, whilst we talked about them a couple of years ago being perhaps a little bit exotic, now they're becoming commonplace, and electric vehicles of all kind of shapes and sizes, really. So, there are some major things out there that continue to drive growth. And, alongside people being at home more over the last couple of years, then we all like gadgets at home, right? So consumer demand has remained high as well. And, if you look at our customer base and, the design engineers and buyers, then they know that we have this sort of the widest selection of inventory, really. So we've done, extremely well as a result of that. And customers come to us because they know us for that.
Now, you mentioned a few sectors in there, right? You mentioned IoT, you mentioned electric vehicles. Which sectors are witnessing the most growth right now?
Well, that's a really tricky question to answer because we see growth really across all product categories. There are no exceptions. So, people are also placing orders out for many months ahead as well. So they're not seeing any demand reduce either. So all sectors, all product categories, and actually just reading from an industry colleague today, the demand is continuing to grow. So we don't really see any let up in it. There's definitely, the industry outlook across I think a variety of commentators just shows us that demand for semiconductors and general components is just continuing to be very, very strong. There is one, I guess, one doubt perhaps that's creeping in, and that's that some competitors saying consumer demand might begin to slow as we see, the global cost of living, I think, or let's say the cost of living globally is beginning to bite. I think certainly I'm based in the UK, and certainly we feel that in the UK, particularly around things like energy prices. Mm-hmm. So, maybe we'll see a shift, but I think any additional capacity that comes as a result of that will quickly get swallowed up, provided things like process nodes are appropriate for the other sectors.
Yeah, I think with that too, you're going to see, so much demand. It's going to take a while to, even if it catches up, and with so many changes going on, like things converting, like we were talking about, like from say the gas prices to electric and solar. You still need electronics even to convert to, almost save money, let's say, or it could be more energy efficient or whatever the case is. So you still need our sector.
You're right, I think. And as you see a shift perhaps from let's talk about, the sort of gadgets we might want at home, to things that bring more energy efficiency for us, whether that's a vehicle or perhaps smart home technology helps us save energy, save money. A lot of those technologies are the more advanced technologies, like the wide bandgap power semiconductors, because these bring efficiency of power usage, and also size as well. And there's always that sense of wanting things to be smaller, lower power, longer battery life, so on and so forth. So if you transplant that into vehicle technology, for example, all kinds of electric vehicles, the demand will continue. It will just maybe shift a little bit.
You mentioned earlier the smart home and the gadgets and the staying home. And, the smart home isn't new, but I do think that there are some upgrades being made there, in addition to just simple gadgets that everybody likes, right? I mean, do you want to talk a little bit with us about the evolution you're seeing in the smart home that goes beyond just some simple gadgets?
Well, I think smart home, you're right, it's taken a while to be adopted. I think what's really driven adoption has been voice control. And we're all familiar with Alexa and Siri and so on and so forth. So I think that's really made it appealing to people to be able to adopt smart home technology, and the market has responded to that as well by producing devices that work seamlessly with each of these systems. And of course, they, like we've said before, they bring convenience into the home, they bring time saving, but they also bring the potential to save energy as well by being more efficient in how we use the things that we have in our home. So, and of course, going back to the demand side of things, these appliances and devices rely heavily on new technology, whether that's perhaps it might be sensing technology and the accuracy of that sensing technology and the electronics that is required to make sure that works effectively, but also things like incorporating machine learning so that systems do operate with some level of intelligence in them, but also you can't do voice recognition without artificial intelligence or machine learning. So being able to implement those in smaller and smaller devices with things like tiny ML, and we've seen partners like Edge Impulse coming to the fore, who are doing some really nice frameworks that work across different manufacturers and different platforms. So we're seeing all sorts of functions then can start to be incorporated into very small, low power, low cost devices. So it goes beyond dimming lights and perhaps turning your heating on and off.
Right. Now you mentioned voice, voice command or voice controls, right? That's what a lot of people, consumers are used to, right? They issue a command, they tell the device to do something, and then it does it. And there is some monitoring and things like that happen with some of these, consumer devices. But are there other things, such as like, occupancy monitoring that we're gonna really start seeing that have come about just because of the way things are, like the pandemic and some of the other things that have gone on in the industry? Are we going to see other technologies be incorporated with some of this, smart home or even, smart industry type things to advance? Yeah.
Well, occupancy monitoring, I think, goes way beyond smart home, doesn't it? So if you look into industry, into smart buildings, where you have a collection of people coming into a building, we have to think about safety and by that I mean people need to stay healthy. I guess right. There are still risks out there. I'm trying not to say the word. But, the virus is still out there, and we need to be mindful of that. But occupancy monitoring, I think, generally for maximum occupancy inside a building, there are safety things to think about where people are in a building at any one time. So it adds a lot more intelligence into understanding the distribution of people throughout a building. And should an emergency situation occur, then potentially whoever's managing that building is much better informed about that. But there are other things too. If you look back last week to Embedded World in Nuremberg, we had a kind of an occupancy monitoring demo on the stand, which was using the Analog Devices Eagle Eye kit. So we could look down onto the stand and sort of see a distribution of people. By stand, I mean, exhibition booths.
Right.
Yep.
Just to make sure everybody it knows what I'm talking about. And it just gives you a sense of how many people you've got around you at any one time. So you see, and that's almost like a turnkey solution from Analog Devices as well. So you see it's something you can immediately deploy out of the box. So it's finding its way into many different areas, I think. Other things have happened as well where we've all got used to remote working, right? So, and of course, that going back to the demand question, that need for infrastructure, that's also driven the demand. But also things like, well, how often now do we see our doctor, our GP, face to face? Usually that's first of all you'll have a phone consultation, but now of course we're starting to get to the point where we can deploy levels of medical equipment at home that are safe for people to use and can monitor certain aspects of physiology that the clinicians can then respond to and adjust treatment regimes accordingly without actually meeting face to face. So again, sensing technology, signal chain technology, machine learning technology and infrastructure all enable that sort of thing to take place.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up sort of the medical aspect, because we all started getting used to this with like our smartphones or smartwatches, right? Where it's monitoring you. Do you see other areas coming in, or do you think it's still going to stay for the next few years with that sort of personal device like your watch or your, or your phone or whatever the case is?
I think it's likely to go more into that direction, right? So rather than having standalone pieces of medical equipment, because we've got this, we're carrying infrastructure around with us every day, and it's more likely you'll have an accessory to your smart device, whatever that might be, or maybe something that directly connects to your wireless networks that pretty much everybody has got at home now. So I guess there's different ways of achieving that connectivity. The phone itself, if we talk about the smart device that most people carry, I think there's some basic sensing technology built into that can help you understand your, for a simple example is steps, right? So how far have you walked? But you really need to have something attached to you if you're going to monitor other signs and other aspects more closely. So whether that's a smart watch or some other sensors that might be attached to your body in some way. If we go back some years, of course, it was the sort of chest strap that people wore with to do your sort of pulse monitoring. Well, all that kind of thing now is built into a simple watch. And there are lots of technology demonstrators out there that if somebody wants to develop something like that, companies like Maxim, now part of Analog Devices, do complete and self-contained technology demonstrators, so you can go test it out for yourself and start to develop your own product.
Yeah, well, it was a few years back. Remember we were seeing like smart clothing or whatever they were trying to implement. Remember that? Like, so it's like you put on the sweatshirt and the sweatshirt monitors what you're doing or whatever it was, right? It monitors your whatever your heart rate or So it's interesting because you're right. It does have to be connected to you somehow to monitor some of those other pieces. So,
but there are also things. I was reading earlier today about nitrogen oxide being emitted from so in your breath, and there's certain things that you can tell with that. So it comes down to what level of sensing technology can you build into the things that you wear in order to help monitor some aspects of somebody's health. What are the markers that you can pick up on that you can then sense and then relay the data back to the appropriate people. As for kind of the woven, sort of semiconductors, has that caught on yet? I'm not sure.
I don't think so. I remember seeing this years. I mean, maybe even 10 years ago, like people talking about it. But yeah, I don't know.
I mean, sensors worn in sports equipment. Companies like Stat Sports,
Right,
will
right.
put a sensor in a player on the football pitch or whatever, to capture that performance data. But it's not woven into the.
It's not for the consumer. It's not for the consumer yet, right? It's really for the athletes, like the high performance athletes,
That's
So, but eventually we'll probably see it. I mean, that's the reality.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine it will come, but
well, I mean, think about it, right? Like, say, whatever, you have some sort of injury and you're going to physical therapy, right? If you're wearing some sort of shirt that's monitoring how you use your arm, if you they go, oh, okay, he's doing this during the day or she's doing that, and that's causing the issue, So, I mean, it's interesting where it could go.
I mean, look at the hats you guys are wearing, right? You could have sensors inside the hats, couldn't you? Maybe it could be doing an ECG while you sit there.
That's right. Why not?
That's making me smarter. Can we do something like that?
Right. That's right. Add some more IQ points or something in there, So I don't know.
When we talk about health, though, there's more to health than just doctors and the physical. We were speaking recently with a sensors manufacturer about the workplace environment and environmental sensing, and I think that plays a big role in our overall physical health too. And more people are becoming concerned with their physical environment now. The air that they're breathing. I feel like there is a trend to really be aware of this now. And so I was wondering if you are seeing any of this too, and maybe what technologies are helping to propel this trend.
Definitely. And I think the awareness thing you mentioned is so true, because, whether you look in sort of newspaper articles, be they online or otherwise, or you listen to news reports or, the general sort of media stuff that we all consume every day, this idea of air quality monitoring, particularly in cities, I think is it's becoming more and more prevalent. And then once you get things like the pandemic happen, and it really sharpens people's thoughts on, what does this look like now? How can I tell, how good or otherwise the air is that I'm breathing?
Right.
And certainly, again, just mentioning embedded world, we had a number of demos last week, and one of them was air quality monitoring. And it's really easy to put together a system. There are a couple of manufacturers. The one I'm thinking of really is Micro E, who produce a thing called the clipboard. I don't know if you guys have come across this. And clipboard is a really, it's a way of building a modular proof of concept. So we built one for air quality monitoring. And you can build it on top of a number of different manufacturers' boards who adopt the same kind of microbus interface. Okay. So there's lots of ways of doing this, but so kind of building it is not so difficult. It's then, well, okay, so what about the data then? What should we do with the data? So you need a service, of course, to serve the data somewhere. But one sensor on its own is probably not particularly useful. It might be useful to you personally. And I've seen a couple of things really. We've supported some startups where through a sponsorship of a startup accelerator in the UK called Central Research Labs, we supported one particular startup who built a personal air quality monitor that you would perhaps carry around on. Let's say you've got a young child in a pushchair, you might carry it on the pushchair, and you can see the sort of levels, the ppm levels of the street that you're walking down. So it's giving people information upon which they can, make informed choices about where they go and what they do. But also then, of course, if you've deployed that in many different places, then you've got the potential to crowdsource the data. And now we really talk about what everybody calls IoT, right? Because what it's really about is gathering data and making use of that data to make decisions somewhere. Yeah. So you can begin to paint a picture of what's the air quality like across this region, across this city, town, street, or in this school, or whatever it might be. So I think that's what you really begin to see, and I don't know, is it too big a term? Democratization of this kind of data. So as people become aware of it, they're prepared to offer their data. They're prepared to crowdsource it.
Well,
Well,
and
you
it-
almost
it's
answered the question then, Brian, that we were
Yeah.
talking about earlier, which was like, what's next then?
Well,
That's
yeah.
really the next step then, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting too because you talk about people getting used to using or giving that data, right? Giving that data out once they've collected it because they're collecting it on a personal device. But we see that so many times with like the GPS data, right? You know, here we use Waze, you know, and Waze basically you're saying I'm right here at this point. I've slowed down. Like you're able to use that data in order to crowdsource and come in. Now there's, you know, and that's like you said, that's where really the intelligence starts coming in because now you could create tangible actions. Are there any other, like for instance in air monitoring, are there any other technologies that then come into play after it? I mean, you sort of answer this, you know, because we could crowdsource it, but you know, is that going to be sort of the next thing where we're going, okay, now we have this data, what are the other things we need to implement in order to make the air quality better, right? You know, how once we have all this data?
Yeah, it's the starting point, isn't it? I think the data, it's having the information upon which to make changes, on which to make decisions. And what that might drive, not necessarily technology, but it might drive legislation. It might hasten the end of the internal combustion engine, or might restrict its use in certain places, for example. So, but those decisions are all based on being able to crowdsource that level of data. But involved in that, of course, and really it's threading through everything now, everything we read about, talk about in our, you know, particularly in our industry sector, all relate, you know, almost always comes back to machine learning and artificial intelligence. And you can interpret that in many different ways, you know, but those machine learning algorithms could then begin to predict what's the air quality likely to be like. Now we could say, you could do that anyway. You could gather the data and you could say, typically the air quality at this time on a Tuesday at this location is X, Y, or Z. But of course, if you're doing it in real time and you're sending that data to a dashboard from this crowdsourced sensor network, then you're in a position to update that in real time, and then predict what the likely air quality levels are going to be. So we're seeing that, you know, the use of AI in pretty much, you know, every sector that and every design that we begin to think about.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Even if you think about where we are now, right? There are so many different consumer systems out there to incorporate into your smart home or your home. Like, what do you think it will really take to connect all of them to the IoT? I mean, we go, you know, we're all transmitting so much data. There's so many things going on, and even some of the systems, like even having them communicate with each other. You know,
and I think that, you know, we talked about smart home earlier, right? And the challenge, and it's not just with smart home. It's been in other sectors and in industry as well, is the ability of these sort of disparate systems to communicate with each other. And it's no different in the smart home, right? Because we've got, as well as sort of standalone devices, we've got Amazon, we've got Google, we've got Apple, and you can, a bit like deciding whether you're going to go down the Apple or the Android route, you make a choice really about where are you going to go. A lot of these systems bring similar functionality into the home, whether that's a much smarter way to control your heating or your lighting or ventilation, or, you know, whatever you might control with it, but they can't talk to each other. So I think this is this will cause a sort of delay in adoption. It will slow down adoption. However, there is what would seem to be a solution at hand. So what we're going to see, and we saw again back to Embedded World last week, great place to go and find out what's really happening. Several manufacturers like Silicon Labs, Nordic, and one or two others had the Matter protocol demoed on their stand. And essentially, this is an IP-based unifying protocol that will bring together those systems, so each will be able to interoperate with the other. So we will drive this interoperability, and that will mean the barrier to adoption will lower. Now, I suppose the $1 million question is, well, how easy will that be for the consumer to use? Because they in the end, they're adopting the technology. You know, our customers, So the design engineers of this
Right.
world are creating it, but it needs to be adopted. It needs to be easy to use.
Yeah.
So I think Matter will solve that. I think on paper it will solve that. We won't really see any devices much before the end of this year, but you'll begin to see these bridging devices that will bridge one system to another. We'll be able to provision devices using Bluetooth, and essentially we'll start to build an interoperable system, so it won't matter who you buy from.
Which is great, because
Right.
so many people, like, if you're connecting your lights, whatever you're using Philips, you got to use the Philips hub to connect to your Alexa, to
Exactly.
whatever it is, right? And now you have all the spare components who you got to connect, and you think Alexa maybe is broken, but really it's your hub's down or whatever the case is. Like, it's not really easy for the average consumer to go through this sometimes.
No, and when you're involved in the technology sector, you often you become everybody's system and IT support as well, because they think everything about. But typically, I'd have to say that for most of us, engineers or understanding technology and comfortable with it, often we can solve the problems that our router might present us with, and we're not, we have the courage to get into the router and look at the settings. But you're right, a lot of people don't. Think to our own parents. How often do you get the phone call? It's not working. How can you help me make it work? Whatever that might be.
Yeah.
So it's you have to, and that's the thing I think about home automation. For adoption, you've got to make it easy, and that's what I think Amazon have really understood with Alexa, and that's why so many people have it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Mark, over at Mauser, you guys are really good at staying on top of the industry, and I was hoping we could maybe close out by just talking a little bit about some of the characteristics that really set you guys apart, especially in the last year, whether it be the warehouse expansion or online tools. How are you really setting yourself apart?
I think there's two things really, and it's we're extremely good at looking in two directions at once, and that's how I like to think of it. And it's really we're looking in the direction of our suppliers and building very strong, close working relationships with them, and that really helps us bringing new products first in the industry, so that when the supplier launches their product, we launch it alongside them, and that's really beneficial for both parties and of course for our customers. And then it's a case of looking at our customers and making sure the experience that we offer them, and also that enabling access to that technology, that builds a really strong customer-focused view inside the business as well. So very good at those two things. And for me, the sort of the secret sauce, if you like, the magic that binds those two together is the warehouse. And as an engineer, I walk into the warehouse and just marvel at this thing. It's a living, a living, breathing entity, the warehouse. And I think building things like that is a science all on its own. So there's definitely specialist logistical expertise to understand what the routing around the warehouse and so on needs to be. The other thing is, because we have one warehouse, right? We're not, we've not separated out any into, or let's say developed any other regional hubs, because it's much easier for us to hold everything in one place, and it means we can develop that that facility really to a very advanced state. So that's our global distribution center in Mansfield in Texas. And very recently, actually, we've added some really high-end automation to it with an auto store, which is like a huge automated robotic matrix. So all sorts of components stored in there, and we need to understand, of course, what does it make sense to put in there? What would you put in there in terms of, is it high runners? What do you put in there first in order to give the quickest throughput for the customer? So we need to analyze our customer data. So it expands our ability to serve customers more quickly, I think.
Yeah,
and also, sorry.
Sorry, I was going to say, it's always so impressive, like going there and seeing the stuff you guys are doing. I'm always so impressed every time I've gone in there.
Me too. And I've, of course, the last 2.5 years, I've not been anywhere near Texas. But I plan to go later this year and go for another warehouse tour and get an update, because we've expanded it enormously. I think we've just added another, I think it's 400. We're breaking ground on another 400,000 square feet, I think, this year, and that'll be multi-layered as well. So we'll get something like 1 million square feet out of it by the time we've got the mezzanine floors in. Of course, what this does is it gives us the ability to keep bringing in new product, because, again, when you're not in the warehouse, it's having that knowledge of, well, I get approached by suppliers all the time. So let's frame it like this. I get approached by suppliers who are not yet part of the Mauser family, but would like to be. And of course, they need a location in the warehouse to hold the product that we would sell. So we have to expand it, and we have to invest in more automation. So it isn't just the auto store, it's vertical lift modules as well. So again, those commonly used parts right in front of the operator all the time, so that the orders can move through really quickly. Legend has it from sort of order to the products being packed and in a in a crate ready to go off to be shipped is 15 minutes.
Wow.
Wow.
So crazy.
It's
Cool.
it's very efficient. It's very fast.
Wow.
But the other thing is, I think, particularly whilst we've had such strong demand over the last 2 years, is there is a risk for customers that when they struggle to get product, that they end up with product that is not genuine, that they've bought on the grey market. They're under such pressure to keep their production lines running. Right. And the thing about, which I think is critical, and I talk about this in various other things I'm involved in as well, is making sure you've got 100% genuine, authentic products. And that's all we ever deal with. So you come to an organisation like Mauser, you know that you can go on the website, you can see quantities, you can see what our back orders look like. So if you need, in these tight supply times, more than we've currently got available, you can schedule your orders out, as I mentioned, and we give visibility and transparency to what we've got available and what is going to become available over the next weeks and months. Again, working closely with our suppliers. So I think it is about the warehouse. It is about working with our suppliers. It is about giving people that genuine product, but then also making it easy for them to find that product. So then we come to the website, really. How do we keep up with it? How do we keep developing the website in the same way that we develop the warehouse? What kind of services do we offer? We keep increasing those. So whether that's the sort of customer resource center, which is containing all the sorts of tools and widgets and resources that help people who are buying professionally, or whether it's things like the technical resource center that brings together keyword searchable content that might speak to how you go about building a Bluetooth mesh lighting system or something like that, some application, but bringing that all together. So there's lots of ways, I think, that we add value beyond, and that's a large part of what my world is about, and my colleagues' world, creating that content that helps people learn, inspire them in a particular, to go down a particular route with a particular application, or even just to build it based on an instructable that we might publish as well. Here's the kits you need, here's the parts that you need, here's the software, here's how you put it together. So we give people the opportunity, I think, to explore those applications as well.
Yeah, and I mean, it's amazing to see what Mauser is doing with content and helping educate and teach the engineer and share information.
Yeah, and we're doing that. We have to have something for everybody, from let's say from school through to highly qualified engineers. Everybody needs content of one kind or another. So we understand the need to address all of this sort of this variety of contacts and the variety of channels through which they'll consume content. So we do 2-minute video snippets that will be about explaining basic functionality of components, through to, like I say, those deep technical projects that show people how to put operating systems together on a given platform, and everything else in between.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today about all of this. I was wondering if you can let everybody know where they can learn more about Mauser and what you guys are working on.
Well, Mauser.com is the place to go. And there are, I think, the last count, it was 27 varieties, I think, of Mauser.com, and based on different languages around the world. So, that's the place to go, both from a product point of view and from a content point of view. Like I say, our technical resource center and our customer resource center really give focused support on either buying or designing. So I'd really start there, I think. And if you want to stay abreast of what's happening in the technology world, get into our subscription center, create yourself an account, and tell us what you're interested in, and we will send you information tailored to your interests on a regular basis.
Mark, thank you for joining us today. It was great talking with you.
I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much for asking me.
Thanks, Mark.